EA, who had 15,000 employees around the world. And what, for the first time ever, what Apple made clear, and indeed, as do Steam now and Google and all those other fine companies, but that all they really cared about was the quality of the game. They didn't really care about the company. They didn't need to know what the company was. So that gave us a huge advantage, because then we released the first Broken Sword director's cut onto iOS, well, it was only the iPhone then. And we're very proud of the fact that we got an average score of 91%, which we still have. And that meant that we could compete on equal terms with LucasArts, because you know they produced Monkey Island shortly after us, didn't get nearly as good a score, and not wishing to point that out, of course, but we have to. And because you know they focused on graphics and we focused on gameplay, and the game went on to sell very well, because ultimately we got a lot of support from Apple. But it was about the quality of the game rather than the amount of marketing you could throw at it, which we were never going to be able to compete at. That's a very long answer to a quite difficult question.
It was quite a difficult question, though, and I think you gave it a good comprehensive answer for that one, really. So in terms of, we're talking about things that we're doing relating to Apple, and we've actually got an event coming up with Apple, haven't we? And I don't know if you want to talk about that with the backers or with the people
very much so.
Today. If anybody's signed up already.
It's at the flagship Apple store in Regent Street, next to Oxford Circus, and we will be there at 7 o'clock, and a lot of the team members are going down.
Yeah, we'll all be there.
And we're not allowed to say that we're going to be giving out comics.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so, but, you know, because that's one of the rules. But we have these wonderful comics that we may take down.
You might take down and leave there.
Yeah, and sign for people if they fancy it.
Yeah.
And it would be great to meet anybody who would like to come along.
And we've got a special guest, haven't we, appearing there?
We have Barrington Phelan, who is the composer, who's done a great job. He's been really, really great to work with. And Barry,
Barry worked on the first Broken Sword. I mean, that was the first game he worked on with us. And he was really enthusiastic about it.
Yeah.
Wrote so much music that we didn't use it all, because he just, you know, each time he went to space, he had a new piece of music. There was just so much of it that we didn't use it all. But yeah,
so he's been a big part of Broken Sword.
Very much so.
Absolutely.
But closer. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Talking about credits, could we credit like Julian, who actually did the layout of the site? Because I want people to know that it wasn't just us.
Oh, I think we did, didn't we? We mentioned Julian.
I thought we did. Yeah.
He did.
Not. He did an amazing site. You know, literally we've come together and he helped us out, and I think he needs a bit of a shout out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
We did mention him out.
We did mention him. We did.
Yeah.
Thanks, Julian.
And then,
if you're watching.
But if Barry's watching, which may or may not be the case, I think the closest to his heart is the cricket that we used to play 12 years before Broken Sword. He was known as the Panther.
Oh, really? Because he's Australian, isn't he?
He's Australian, and in the way that he would leap athletically to catch anything that came anywhere near him. So I'm sure Barry would want that to mention.
Sounds like he could be a character in a future game.
He could, yeah. The Australian Panther.
Cat burglar.
Yeah, so that's on the 23rd of April, so quite soon now, actually.
Yep.
Yes.
And that's in London's Regent Street flagship Apple store.
Yes.
And we'll all be there. Charles will be there, Noirin will be there.
Yes.
And the rest, a lot of the rest of the team.
I think everybody here is going to be there.
Yeah, so it should be quite
really
exciting, and we'd
so
love
please
to
do come along.
see whoever can make it. But you have to sign up online, don't you, with the Apple
Oh
store?
yes. Yeah.
If you've got an Apple ID or something.
Yeah.
Yes, you need your Apple ID.
So they're not called tickets; they're called just signing in.
Place.
Yeah, you make
registration. You have to
book a
register.
place.
Register.
Book a
Book a
place.
place. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we're not asking games about whether you're questions about whether you're going to do another game yet. So I'm going to miss those ones out.
No, we've already answered that.
Yeah. So what about in relation to the terminology that you use? Sometimes people don't fully understand what the language used in the game design process is. And so another one of our backers has asked, when we talk about script being locked, things like that, can you explain what that means for the sake of people that don't understand?
Well, Joost would love to think that locked means locked.
Yes. We would all like to think that locked means locked, apart from Charles.
What script lock means is that you have you've locked the everything. Of course, is digital in terms of the script, and then you lock it, which means that Yoast puts a lock on that nobody can change it anymore.
Right.
In theory.
In theory.
In practice, what happens is even when you're in the recording studio, there are changes that will be made. Rolf has been absolutely brilliant. What happened was that before the afternoon before we recorded, I took him through the game. He doesn't tend to play the games, but I took him through the game. I showed him everything. He's very, very bright. Absolutely got it. And then when we were actually recording the lines, he'd often come back and he'd say, look, I really feel that this can be done better this way. And he's so experienced. He really inspires the other actors. So we're very grateful to him for taking on that role. But that then comes back, and what happens is we have to change it really quickly, because that then goes out to the localizers who translate it into French, German, Spanish, Italian, but also Polish, Russian, Turkish, and probably other languages as well. And what Yoast has to do is he has to try and keep track of that. Now, we were working really hard, and I got an insight into how this works when somebody changes lines, and you have to keep track of every line, make sure it gets changed in every language,
in all the versions,
and it turns into a combinatorial nightmare.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And
things get missed out.
And then you add instructions, and which don't need to be recorded but do need to be translated, and we need to make sure that those are there. So it was a hell of a job, and I think we kind of got away with it, because actually when we did the roundup, of course it's very easy in hindsight to just check that everything's been done, and pretty much everything had been done.
Great. Okay. So it's basically Yoast is in charge of script lock.
So for that script lock. So the other thing, if you work backwards, you have what's called a master candidate, and a master candidate is something that you believe could go out.
Yeah.
And we've had a master candidate for a few days. There was testing yesterday afternoon, and a couple of serious bugs were found due to the data, missing data. But they were late because of data, and they were very easy to fix, because it meant the graphics that were being accessed. What we did was we did a full clean build over the weekend, rebuilt everything to make sure that there was nothing corrupt, that all the assets were grabbed from start. And then we played through, and there were a couple of bugs that were very easy to fix, and now it's been played through again, and we've had a couple of playthroughs that have been totally clean. So we had a master candidate that we thought was a master, then we found the bugs, and then last night we had a master candidate we believed was a master. We tested it again, uploaded it. We've subsequently downloaded the version that we uploaded to Steam earlier today, and checked, done a smoke test, made sure that the achievements work. And there may still be problems, but we've done an awful lot of testing, and it would be unlucky if there were. And if there are any problems, we'll obviously move to fix them very, very quickly. So that's the master candidate. Before that, you have what we in England call beta. In America, they're called beta. And they laugh at us so much in America for calling it beta. But
my confession is I actually say beta.
I know a lot of people do. A lot of people do.
Beta. I say beta, I think.
Yeah, good for you. It's a good
British.
Redditch upbringing.
Redditch pride.
Yeah.
You leave Redditch alone. It's all right. If anyone's from the Midlands, I love the Midlands.
Beat with an A on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So beta is the definition of beta is that you have a game that if you had no pride, you could launch in theory. It's pretty ropey, and there are a lot of assets that you want to improve, but there are no showstoppers, and it's niggly bugs, and that normally happens about 3-4 weeks before you master. And so we refer to beta quite a lot, and then prior to that is alpha, and alpha is you can play all the way through. There are all the assets are in some state. It's looking a bit ropey. There's some logic puzzles, but you can actually finish it. And it's really important. I guess over the years, this has become the terminology that we use, because once you genuinely reach alpha, you have a pretty high confidence that you are at this point, and it will then take X to get to beta. And once you're at beta, then it'll take X to go, because it's really the only way to judge whether the state you are at in a game is to play it. That's really the only way. Play your own games. And I'm very privileged to be the one that obviously does that, because then people say, well, how much do you think needs to be done? And I am very picky, and really I hope people will find that this second part is actually very, very well polished, because we have gone round again and again. We've resisted the temptation, particularly from a lot of people who say, where is it? It's outrageous that we have to wait this long. But ultimately what matters is the quality.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, I know for a fact that you were testing it and going back through the game over and over again, pretty much every day since we've been waiting for this game to come out. In terms of the process then, so we've talked a little bit about script blocking and things like that. Unfortunately, I don't think we can speak to Joost, because we were going to ask him. We are.
Oh, Joost is going to make his
coming
appearance.
Man of the hour.
Joost, you gather that we were talking you up here.
So another.
I was just doing some work.
He's been working very hard and been quite stressed out, I think, today, Joost.
Yeah, it's really stressful.
So Joost is one of the developers of the team, like one of the key developers, the key developer maybe.
Our Chief Technology Officer, if we
CTO.
Technical Director in English, Chief Technology Officer in American.
And you've worked with Revolution for quite a few different games, haven't you?
For the last 10 years on and off.
Yeah. And the remasterings, I believe, you worked on, didn't you? The remastering of Broken Sword
1 and 2, Steel Sky, and now this for the last 2.5 years. What's it been?
Yeah, so it's good you got a chance to speak to Joost, really, but normally he's kind of hidden in the corner with his head in his keyboard, getting stuff done, not just sleeping, getting stuff done. So how has the last couple of days been for you, Joost, and getting this game out today? Which is
quite stressful. It seemed like all was going well, and then there's like internet connection dropping out, and just.
Which is quite common, actually, things like that, last minute sort of, oh my god, what's going to happen?
Seems to be a sensor in there somewhere which just triggers whenever there's an urgent situation.
But this time relatively smooth, would you say?
Yeah, we managed to
Touch
get
wood.
Compared to last time.
Compared to the last live
we managed to
stream.
get the Steam one up in time. The GOG one's just right behind, so.
So you're in charge of the Linux specifically, you're our Linux expert, aren't you?
That as well, yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of the backers who might be watching today are particularly grateful to you, I think, because you've made the Linux build of the game for them and dealt with that side of things. So in future, do you think that's going to become something that's becoming more common, providing Linux support? And
yeah, definitely, especially as Valve recently a few months ago announced SteamOS, which is based on Linux. So I think a lot of developers are going to take Linux a lot more seriously going forward. I quite like that development as a Linux user myself, and I think in a few years' time, every major game will be on Linux. Not just because of SteamOS, but also Humble Bundle motivates people to do Linux versions, Linux ports. So.
And people have been very vocal and very keen to have the Linux versions out there, haven't they? I think that's one thing I receive quite a lot of messages from, particularly from Kickstarter backers. So you've got Joost to thank for that, along with the release today virtually, because he was the one who pushed the button like about 10 seconds before the live feed started.
He did. Captured by Christian and Tobias, no less.
So we've got that moment recorded.
Yep, posterity.
That's the nature of the game production process now, though, is that everything is sort of monitored on social media and everything is recorded. And how do you feel about that, Charles, that side of things?
Well,
you love social media, don't you?
I do love social media, but you see, I'm old enough not to be very careful what I post. So I will only post. I'll post stuff that I am confident that somebody could come back in 5 or 10 years' time and requote, which means that it's maybe not quite as personal as some things, and it certainly doesn't have nearly as much swearing as what a lot of people will post. But I'm very aware. I mean, you hear these dreadful stories about people who posted things 5, 6, 7 years earlier, and it comes back to haunt them. And I mean, that is the modern world, and it never used to be like that. I actually think in many ways that's a real shame, because it means you can't express yourself to your friends online. Through social media, because of the risk of it coming back in the way that just wasn't the case when it was obviously oral or given through written.
I definitely think it's something you have to be conscious about, but it's interesting. One of the questions that we got from one of the backers kind of made me think of this. Ben Salmon, one of our Kickstarter backers, asked, how do you manage to not give away, being as you are you're a very chatty gentleman, you like to talk about your game, obviously, because you're excited about it. So how do you manage to deal with the challenge of not giving away the storyline early on in development?
That's a really great question, because magazines come to you and they ask all about it, and it would be so tempting to get the short-term gain of the excitement of people, telling them. But ultimately you ruin it, and then ultimately you're giving the story away too early. So what we do is we'll come up with a marketing plan of what we're going to say and when, and we really need to stick to that, because and it's kind of naive for developers. A lot of developers do this. It's very naive to go much too early and promise the world. Well, some other developers do promise the world and then under-deliver, and ultimately people are disappointed. And we try to make sure that we only announce things we're confident that we can deliver it.
So you managed to sort of hold your tongue in relation to certain things. For instance, Ben mentioned that he talked to you about the Ouroboros early in the very early stages of the Kickstarter campaign, and
This is
apparently
Ben Salmon.
Ben Salmon, yeah, and he said you had an excellent poker face in relation to that.
I think actually what Ben did was he actually pointed me to a website with the Ouroboros. We were using the Ouroboros, but I think we can thank Ben directly for the emphasis that the Ouroboros then had, because we were using it as a symbol, but for some reason I went to that website and saw, and it gave actually new ideas. So Ben, it wasn't so much a poker face; it was the fact that I was inspired by your
Wow, that's
post.
quite an accolade, isn't it?
So yeah, so I mean, it's very flattering to say it was a poker face, but that's not quite true.
Well, that is a great accolade, so I'm sure he'll be really happy about that. Hopefully he's watching. So we've got a few other questions. I don't know whether we wanted to carry on for a little bit longer, or if you wanted to...
I don't think there's any great rush.
No? Okay, well, Charles wants to... Noirin's laughing. Well, we've got another 10 minutes before... so if anyone has any questions in the chat that they'd like to ask, any burning question they'd like to ask Joost or Charles, or any other member of the team who you've met today, then... or Peter. Sadly, Tony's not with us today. We should probably mention that. You may have not noticed that his flat cap is not present.
No, Tony's gone on holiday.
Tony's in the lakes.
Some people do go off on holiday at the key points, don't they?
Yeah, who does that?
Oh my gosh, how rude is that? I came back though, just in time.
We've been biting our tongue, haven't we,
have.
all week, just waiting for the moment. And finally, Triona, thank you for giving us that opportunity. You gave us the setup, and now we have the payoff.
Well, thanks guys for all of your support. To be fair, I think I needed this holiday to prepare myself for the onslaught of work and community management that I'm going to be doing in the next few upcoming weeks and months.
About addressing all the problems that are going to come from...
Well, there won't be any problems.
No, there won't be any problems.
Joost has ironed them all out for us.
Yeah.
So, okay, so going through some other questions then. How would you balance flashing... This is from Claire Mangoyana. How do you balance fleshing out individual locations, for example Paris, with having multiple different destinations to explore around the world?
Yeah, which is a great question. Like films, games have genres, and in an adventure genre, you kind of expect to have a base, wherever it be, whether it be Paris or Paris, London or New York, whatever, and then go off to exotic locations. And that's just the way that Indiana Jones is a great inspiration, has been a great inspiration, and that kind of starts
the games or the
films. The game's great as well, but the films in particular, and Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is the best adventure film ever, in my opinion.
So some inspiration there.
Very much so. So in that you start off, of course, in the jungle, in the South American jungle, and Indiana Jones gets the golden head, and then you go back to his college. And it's sort of going between those ideas, and it's the going between the safe areas that feel familiar to the audience to the exotic ones that don't. So the balance, I guess, is building up the context for the journey in the safe locations, and then the payoff is going off to these places and discovering things that are extraordinary.
Which is going to happen in episode 2, isn't it?
Very much so. Yeah. I mean, episode 2 starts in the Spanish countryside with George and Nico being shot at, and George then meets his ultimate antagonist, the goat. So we certainly start part 2 as we need to go on, which we've really upped the drama. And the other thing is, a number of people were talking about the difficulty level. I mean, when we go on to part 2, of course, we up the difficulty level as well, because you would expect that. You'd expect as the game progresses for it to be more difficult. So there are some really challenging puzzles, but those puzzles are always, we hope, absolutely logical, both in terms of how to solve them from a gameplay perspective, but also from the player, from the character motivation. It's really important to us that the story is carried through, so people do what they would be expected to do under those circumstances, and we've developed the character so that they do that. So hopefully people will find that a lot of people really loved. We got fantastic feedback for the first part. For people who enjoyed that, then I really hope they'll really love the second part, because there's an awful lot of paying off. A lot of characters come back. We close a lot of the character story arcs, and then drive the story to a conclusion, which I have a great deal of passion for the whole Gnostic and the Gnostic Gospels and all that side, which hopefully get conveyed in the story. And what I'll do over the next couple of days is write a piece that will form part of our director's notes, which actually go into the background, the facts behind the whole thing, which are really what drove a lot of the locations and the puzzles in this game.
And that's going to form part of one of the Kickstarter awards, isn't it? The director's notes. Am I right? That's the game design.
Yeah, well, it'll go into the manual. It'll go into the manual. I think it will of course go to our Kickstarter backers, and it'll go to them first. But I think it's a more general document for people who've played the game to look back and understand. Because one of the things that we're very proud of is that after the first game, an awful lot of people had a huge interest in the Da Vinci. Sorry, I was going to say Da Vinci Code. They didn't have an interest in the Da Vinci Code at all. They had an interest in the Knights Templar as a historical subject, and Broken Sword very much moved the Knights Templar into the zeitgeist of the of public imagination.
Yeah. You yourself are a big fan. We had that celebration of commemoration of Jacques de Molay's 800-year anniversary.
I think it was 700, wasn't it?
700.
Yeah, 1314. Yeah, 700 years. Yeah. Well, he was because of course he was arrested in 1307 and tortured, but it was 7 years later that he was actually killed on the Ile de Paris. By the Pont Neuf, as it is now, and it probably was the Pont Neuf then.
Blimey!
Wasn't he killed for recanting his confession? Wasn't he?
Is that the reason?
I think so. I think they coerced a confession, and then he said, "My only crime was giving that confession in the first place."
Wow!
Something of that nature.
Well,
It's very noble.
I know.
It's all, you can look it up.
So Spider Matt Thornton wants to know, based on this historical context to all the games, were you a fan of history at school or college when you were growing up? Well, I think that's kind of been answered.
Kind of, but actually, I mean, the thing is that we live in York, which is an amazing city, and we live next to the cathedral, the Minster, which at some point you should probably point the camera out of the view, see the view.
I could give it a good try.
Because it's the most amazing view, and
we've got the Minster just outside, basically.
And we, when the walk past the Minster, which is a 2-minute walk, we go past St Michael of Belfry, which is where Guy Fawkes was actually christened. We also walk past the point at which Constantine the Great was declared emperor in around about 350. Just beyond there, we have the multitangular tower, which is one of the big towers that still the Roman remains from the Roman period. We have the Vikings, where this was the capital of the Viking Empire, and there are a lot of Viking remains around here. We have the Merchant Adventurers Hall, which was built in 1350, which is this most extraordinary hall, guild hall, merchant hall. And the timber and everything is extraordinary. And York is very small, so you can walk around these extraordinary streets and come across these extraordinary things. And I think York, in many ways, is very inspirational for this type of game, because it feels very modern on one hand, and very medieval and Roman and Viking on the other.
Maybe you could set a future project in York.
We should do. It would make a lot. I mean, the
or
Minster
the Netherlands.
would be, or the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Based in York and going to the Netherlands, maybe, in a sort of an adventure.
Well, we do tease Joost, of course, because someone like New York used to be New Amsterdam, because the Dutch actually landed on Manhattan and had it. But I think, wasn't it you fought on the wrong side with Napoleon? Or did we come up with another? We came up with some fairly flimsy
but we didn't hold it
reason
against you.
to seize it from you. But that was a long time ago. And as you point out, you know, a lot of the boroughs still have Dutch names, like Harlem.
Indeed.
Harlem and
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn, yeah. There you go.
Well, we're in Old York here, the original. And
Yeah, and it was interesting because down at the bottom of the road we have a pub called the Black Swan, which was owned by James Wolfe's mother, and maybe young James Wolfe himself. Now, James Wolfe, of course, was Wolfe of Quebec, who, when Canada was French, and whoever controlled Quebec controlled Canada. And James Wolfe, I mean, it's a great story. James Wolfe, flying a French tricolour, so he's pretending to be French, sailed some British ships up there, got his guys to scale the heights of Abraham, blew the French away, signalled for reinforcements, and overnight, the whole of Canada became British.
Wow.
So, you know, you've got these great stories.
I didn't know that, and I've lived in Canada. That's quite bad.
Well,
isn't it?
but Toronto used to be called York, of course, you know that.
Yes, well, yeah.
And Toronto was the Native American name. And York University is in, which is in Toronto, which is a real pain because you'll type in York University and inevitably you'll be directed to Toronto rather than our
that was
own.
my old university, so I always had that problem. Yeah.
Was it?
York University.
Oh, right. But if
yeah.
you'd been at Toronto University as well, then that would have been fantastic.
It would have been a bit of a coincidence.
It would.
I agree.
It would.
Do we have any questions, Alex, from the chat that we can go through just before we finish, because we've hit 7 o'clock already? Noirin's waving her watch at me.
The mindless one would like to know if we will use Kickstarter again.
Oh golly, mindless one.
Will
That's
we-
quite a heavy question, isn't it?
It is.
Kickstarter again?
Kickstarter's been absolutely brilliant, and the idea of doing a project without some sort of consultation with the fan base would be terrifying,
Yeah.
because what would happen previously is that you would sell a game, you would pitch a game to a publisher, and they would then decide on the demand. And they would have to decide whether in 18 months or 2 years a retailer would want to stock it. There were so many ifs and buts. Now we have the opportunity, which is a huge privilege, to be able to go straight to people and ask them what they think. And so if it wasn't Kickstarter, then it would be something similar, because you know, any developer that thinks that who's arrogant enough to think that they could come up with a game design without actually consulting with their future audience has to be pretty dumb.
Indeed, and I think the role that the Kickstarter backers have played in the game, so now they appear in the game in certain places for the people that
but
want the competition.
also right from the very
And the
start,
feedback.
when you know a few fans said that George's jaw was wrong. I mean, we've talked about this before, but the funny thing is that to them they were delighted that we responded. To us, we were delighted that actually we had all this information coming back, and you know, clearly we filter what's said. But you know, people were absolutely right. The jaw was slightly wrong. We changed it, and now we have a George that's much more true to the historical characters. Likewise, and again, we've talked about this before. But the the lights, the room lights that Andy B added, and that was very much in response to people feeling. And often you need people to push you, because otherwise you get into your comfort zone, and it's very useful to have people bombarding you with comments.
Yeah.
And as long as they're constructive criticism rather than outright attacks, then they're incredibly valuable. And we've listened to a lot of people, and we had a lot of comments after the release of episode 1, and taken those on board in designing the final elements of episode 2 and the way that we've coded it.
It has been really a useful part of the process, hasn't it? I mean, and
well, to be able to communicate with 15,000 people is extraordinary. And you know, we when we wrote Broken Sword 3, we were THQ actually paid I don't know how much to find out who our audiences were and what they thought, and we were thrilled by that. And now the whole thing's reversed, and instead of having to pay to find out what people think, you know, these are guys who tell us what they think and have contributed to the development of the game. So, you know, the way that digital has changed things so profoundly over the last 5 years, it's just extraordinary.
Yeah, and that's all part of the social media revolution and the social internet.
Part of it is being able to communicate through social media. Part of it is digital distribution, and digital distribution means that instead of a couple of hundred slots at retail, now you actually effectively have an infinite number, which means that instead of the bottleneck controlled by publishers and by retailers, now it's the audience that decides what they want, and that's had a profound